Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Nicole Beasley. Nicole is a Senior Manager of IS Assurance over at KLR. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. Well, thanks for coming on. Could you give our audience a little background on your career thus far?
Yeah, I started my career actually a little differently than most IT auditors. I actually started in financial accounting. I got my master's in accounting, so I went down the standard financial path. About a couple years into my career, I had a partner reach out to me and he said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing some IT work? We have all this work that we need, and we need some people that are willing to go get trained on how to audit IT, learn systems. Would you be interested?" I said yes. So that's how I entered into the IT space. That kind of transitioned from doing like IT financial audit into like internal control SOX implementation and then SOC work. And then I entered into a space of doing SOC audits. And once I got to that point, I started doing a little bit of risk assessments, some internal control implementations to kind of bounce against the SOC framework and learning how to do IT. And that's kind of how I grew my career.
Very cool. And it seems like you've worked your way up pretty quickly as well within the consulting world, which is kind of its own animal. I've worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years and hired quite a few people into consulting firms. And for people that haven't worked in a consulting firm, I think sometimes it's hard to picture what it's really like, and the pace at which people work, and the expectations for quality versus speed and stuff like that. So. I believe you told me previously offline that you've kind of been involved in the hiring process for some of these folks, and obviously you're a senior manager now. Are there certain, I guess, challenges that you've encountered over the years in getting these folks on board?
Yeah. So the first couple of things that we've had issues with is bringing in new hires, right? You can go find someone that's got a degree in accounting or IT or cyber, but getting them to learn how to audit is actually the hardest part of getting someone into the consulting role of or entering into SOC compliance work, right? You're trying to teach these kids that have only read in books how IT works to like ask the right questions, because the main thing with consulting is asking the right question to help your client. And a lot of times that's the hardest thing we're facing. And then as we get into hiring experienced hires, we find that we don't have enough talent pool to even pull from to build our team or grow out our practices as we start looking in the market, because it's such a niche. It's not like going and finding someone that does tax, right? I can go find 30 people that do tax tomorrow and put them on staff, but it's not it's not as easy with cyber, and a lot of people don't really even understand what cyber audit is or like cyber consulting is. So it's like teaching all these new hires or even experienced hires what we're looking for is cause a little bit of a slow progress for us, right? We struggle with hiring.
Yeah, and one thing I've seen companies do well is they'll start a campus recruiting program, and therefore basically they have a pipeline of people ready to go every semester, and they have a constant pipeline of people moving and training, and makes alleviates a lot of the need for a lot of the seniors if you're growing them internally. You mentioned a really interesting point about how sometimes it's difficult to teach people what questions to ask. I actually have the same problem in training recruiters. It's not a perfect science. Every situation is different, every client is different, every environment is different, and it's tough to teach some intangible things where you kind of have to learn on the fly and figure out the right questions to ask at the right time, because there's no set rule like you're going to ask this question in this scenario and it's that way 100% of the time. You have to be kind of adaptable, and I think you have to be intelligent enough, really, and then to have the soft skills. Um, so, especially at the entry level, how do you identify the types of people that might be able to pick up those intangible sort of things?
When I'm interviewing, I actually don't ask them anything to do with college. I try and get them to talk about themselves. I try and get to a point where I can kind of see how they are. Like, I kind of just want them to talk to me. So I try asking questions to kind of warm them up and see if their personality comes out. Because what I've typically found is, we're looking at all these college hires that have, strong GPAs. And if I can get them to talk to me and I can kind of see when they start asking me questions back, how are those questions actually being asked? Are they just copying me? Are they trying to really get to know me or get me to answer more deeply? And then I do that. And then the second thing I kind of do is I say, hey, is there any questions you have for me? And so I give them a chance to kind of show me their like ability to think on the fly. So instead of, just drilling them with questions, I'm like, hey, what do you have for me? And that allows them to show me I can think on the fly. I can come up with stuff. And believe it or not, it's a good way to weed people out. Because when I ask people to ask me questions, sometimes just not, they'll just shut down. And I'm like, well, if a client asks you something like that and you can't respond quickly, you're going to have a hard time with consulting because a lot of times these clients are looking for us to give them guidance. And if you can't think on the fly, you're going to have a hard time growing in this industry. And that's really where I've succeeded. I took a different route. I went the route of I want to be the known advisor, the person that they can come ask me any question about compliance and I can give them an answer. And if I can't give them an answer, I know how to navigate it in the way of being like, hey, I don't know the answer, but I'll come back after I talk to a specialist. And usually, if you do that, you gain trust with your clients. And that trust is something that's hard to build if you can't think on the fly. Because if you can't think on the fly, you'll freeze when clients ask you questions. You just will.
Yeah, I mean, that trust is very hard to build and very easy to lose. You could have a great relationship with a client or with a candidate or with whomever, and you lie to them once and they figure it out. You've just, shot your whole relationship in the foot. It's interesting. You mentioned kind of asking candidates about the questions they're asking. I would think that a lot of folks, especially at that level, at the college level, they would be asking questions that they've written down ahead of time and they've memorized and stuff like that. But like you said, if they're asking questions that you could tell aren't just rote, rehearsed, things like that, that does show adaptability. So yeah, that's a great point. What about on the more experienced hire front? If you're hiring a staff or associate, depending on the firm, or senior supervisor or something like that, are there certain traits you look for?
Yeah, I typically look for, if it's like a staff or a senior, I look for someone who is willing to learn. I don't want someone that only wants to do one thing, right? And you'll see that, right? Someone just wants to test controls and that's all they want to do. Well, unfortunately, with what we do, we have to be so adaptable. We are a trusted advisor. We have to do more than just test controls in some situations. We might go in and build a framework for someone, build some controls for people. And if all they want to do is one thing, it's going to be really hard. So I try and see how willing to learn they are. And then I also kind of look for the the skills of, will you communicate to me and how are you going to communicate and how will that help grow our team? Because I'm looking for someone that has skills different than me, right? I don't want someone that comes in and does the same thing as me. I want someone that has good communication skills like me, but I want them to bring something that I don't have to the table. Because when I look to grow my team, I want people around me that I can say, if I can't do it, I know this person can because that's what they're really good at. And that's kind of what I look for when you're going into that experience role. And then once you get to a manager level, I ask a lot about really detailed IT questions to make sure that the individual is ready for that role. Because a lot of times you'll see a senior that's been a senior for 3, 4 years. I typically want to make sure that that's not just because they're lacking in IT, because that's typically what you'll see if someone's not getting promoted for a long term in a consulting industry, is that maybe they're not strong in a certain areas. So I'll try and poke holes to make sure they are ready for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great point. Not everybody gets promoted very quickly, and sometimes people do they're just comfortable in that senior consultant role, and they don't necessarily feel the need to be promoted. They enjoy what they do, and they like just cranking out reports. And I think for some people that's cool. What do you do? Is there a place for that person who just likes testing controls and that's all they want to do in the consulting world? Or I guess internal could be an option too in industry.
Yeah, honestly, it's always good to have someone like that. I have a team member like that. They're a manager. All they want to do is test controls and review controls. They don't want to go to the next level because they don't like any other pressure or learning how to do sales or learning how to do different IT services. They just want to stay at that level. And they're the perfect teammate, right? Because you always have to have someone that wants to do that. I think as long as they're really good in that area, they're a great team member. And sometimes when it's someone like that, I've actually guided a couple folks like that that maybe weren't cut out for the speed and quality purpose of a consulting firm into a more internal role. Sometimes you'll just see that they're not cut out for learning about realization and producing quality and making sure you're still doing it the quality you need at a quick rate. So it's something that sometimes is not cut out for consulting, but if they're really good and they know what they're doing and they can do it effectively, they're a great teammate to have. They're one of those teammates I'm like, I will hire you and I will let you grow at the rate you want to be at. If you want to stay here forever, that's fine.
Cool. Yeah. Have you ever hired somebody from the internal side? And the reason I ask is often the sentiment that I'll get from consulting firm clients is, we just don't hire from industry. Reason being is people in industry, they just can't handle the pace of consulting. Do you think there's ever, an exception to that rule? And have you hired from industry?
We did at my last firm to hire from industry, and that was what we struggled with once we got them in. They had the knowledge, they had the ability to do it. They just weren't able to adapt to the consulting environment because in consulting, you're juggling multiple projects, right? 3, 4, 5 projects at a time, typically, right? And so people that come from internal usually are only focused on one job at a time. And so what I've seen when we've brought people over is that they struggle with balancing their plates. So it's like when you see someone drop a plate at a restaurant, that's kind of what we're experiencing when we try and bring industry people in, which is why we kind of have steered away from it in a way, because you really don't want to do that to someone. You want to set them up for success. And that's something you can easily weed out when you're interviewing these individuals. Because sometimes I had one of my last firms, I brought in someone as a senior, best senior I've ever gotten. He just wanted to learn and he wanted to do something different. And he liked having multiple jobs and doing multiple things and being able to grow his career. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's always going to happen.
Yeah, and sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get unlucky. Sometimes somebody says all the right things, and you get them on board, and just doesn't work out. So I'm just a big advocate of broadening the talent pool when you can, especially as you've mentioned. If there's only so many people out there doing this work, and especially in the consulting world, hiring's a zero sum game. Whoever you hire comes from another consulting firm, so that's a position they have to backfill. And if everybody's doing that, it's just a revolving door basically in the industry where everybody's hired from one firm goes to another firm, and eventually some people get burnt out and then they go to industry. And it's been that way as long as I've been in the industry. So I think the industry is ripe for some innovation in that respect. I think the automation platforms have stepped up to try and fill some of this quote unquote talent gap, at least in the GRC consulting space. Um, so, consulting talent gap, do you think that there is one there? I mean, it sounds like maybe you think there is kind of at the senior level. Would you say that's kind of where the gap is?
Typically, senior manager is where we, as like the senior level and the manager level. And then below and above, no problems, right? I think the reason that the senior and manager gap is so broad is because exactly what you're talking about. Another firm will come take them. And then you now have a role. And if you take someone else, then there's another role. And it's just constant loop of and one open position always. And it's typically happens with seniors and managers because They're a little bit more expensive than staff as far as a billing perspective, but they're also very well wanted. Everyone wants those levels because we need those levels to successfully grow. And everyone's always fighting over those two main roles, right? Because I can go easily hire some staff from a college, teach them up, train them to be exactly what we want, and then push into senior levels. But they can't do that in a year. So that's why that senior spot is hard to fill.
Well, some firms would say that you can just kind of throw them to the wolves and see what happens. But yeah, no, I totally agree. What do you think is causing this? Like, what's the root cause of not having enough seniors and managers? Are there just not enough people coming through the pipeline from the colleges?
A lot of it is pipeline because when you're going through these programs, especially accounting, right? If you look for people like CPAs, for what I do, I have my CPA because I have to sign a SOC 2 report. So when we go into the pool, we typically try and look for either accounting or cyber. We'd like people that have their CPAs though, because eventually, if you want them to grow into the role, they'll have to sign reports. And you can't sign a report if you don't have a CPA. So the biggest problem is that with accounting, they push tax and financial audit. That really is what schools sell, right? You get your degree, you go do either financial audit or you do tax. They don't really mention consulting. And then what I found with the IT folks that are in cyber IT, they're pushing like business analysis work, development work. They're not pushing consulting, right? It just kind of gets floated out as something that is not really known about. So when they're looking for jobs, they're not looking for what we do. And what we do is so unique, it's hard to find people because that's not what's being sold to them. And I think the hardest part with that is then you're fighting this stigma of if I get my accounting degree and I get my CPA, I should do this. And that's what they're telling them to do. And, these kids don't know any different. That's how I ended up in financial audit. They told me that's what you're supposed to do. So I got my degree, I got my CPA, and I went into financial audit. It was actually more lucrative and something I really enjoyed a lot better in consulting because I don't have to always audit, right? I can go help my clients because I do consulting, right? I can do something that's not just a standard audit. And that's something that is hard to find now. So it's now changing the narrative of, yeah, we have accounting firms that do tax and audit, but they also do consulting. And this is what consulting is for people that don't want to go the standard route and maybe have different passions. Like I've always wanted to help people, which is why I love what I do, because I like to do risk assessments and internal controls building. I don't have to audit someone. I don't have to necessarily give someone an exception. I can help them build better processes. And and that's where we kind of see a gap.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when you look at the programs that colleges have, really the only one that's at least somewhat aligned to what you do is management information systems, where there's kind of a crossover between the technology and the business. But those programs aren't usually as big as, say, computer science or the accounting program. So, yeah, I think it starts with the colleges really pushing this as a career path. I think often there is a stigma around audit and GRC that it's not as exciting as like the more technical security operations or engineering types of roles. So people just aren't pushed into those directions, especially if they're really passionate about the technology itself versus the people and process surrounding technology. So it's just a little bit of a different viewpoint. But I think a lot of students probably just don't realize what all kind of interesting work is involved with auditing and consulting. You see a ton of different clients, meet a ton of different people. Sometimes travel. I know it's a lot less than it used to be, but I know when I built a campus recruiting program at a firm that we both worked at for a while, a big part of that was really selling the benefits of consulting and the interesting things that they're going to be doing and just really advocating that. So I think the responsibility falls on not just the companies doing the campus recruitings, but also the universities to understand that this is a good career path out there and it's a good place for people to go. Um, to kind of go back to what we had talked about previously, you'd mentioned that there's sometimes maybe a tension between in the consulting world, the level of quality and professionalism and things like that you need to worry about, coupled with the speed at which everybody's working. How do you balance those two and keep yourself sane and make sure that your auditors underneath you are balancing those as well?
I think a lot of it is starts with training, like just like you're talking about, even with brand new hires, training people to do the right thing, teaching them what to look for. Finding efficiencies in testing is really hard, right? Because, for the most part, when you do a SOC 2 audit or any kind of compliance audit, the controls are very similar, right? If I can read a control, I can test it. But the biggest thing is teaching them how to do it correctly. And once that you learn how to do it correctly, you can start teaching them how to add speed to that correct test. I think if if they miss that first piece, they're going to always struggle. So as upper management, we try and find ways to make it more efficient. So like I've come up with cheat sheets on like how to audit really hard systems like Oracle platforms and Linux. Like, how do I do this? Because what happens is they have to go learn somewhere. And if they don't have that ability to learn quickly, kind of like we've talked about, they will fall flat. So as a senior manager, you need to be guiding the testers and finding ways to help your testers. So a lot of times we'll add, certain types of sampling, how to do appropriate sampling and then what to look for when you look at samples, because we kind of know what to expect, right? As an auditor, if you understand criteria and a framework, you kind of know what you're expecting. So by learning how to test, having some stuff that guides them, it typically produces faster results, but with a higher quality. So if you say, I need you to look at this piece of evidence, this is what we typically look for, it gives them a guide. They go, okay, I look for this. If they have that, that's great. That should allow them to speed up over time because they know what they're looking for based on control. It kind of shapes their mind into learning how to audit. Because at the end of the day, if they can ask good questions and maybe they're lacking on how to do the testing, it will shape them into testing correctly and quicker. So typically what I see for the first year when we bring in a new staff, within the first 6 months, their speed doubles. Within the first year, it goes up to about times 4 usually if they're on the right path. And now if they're really accelerating, it will be 4 and 8. And those 4 and 8 people that you see, those are the people that excel faster. So I can tell you within a year, if that person's at 8, they're going to be a senior by halfway next year, because not only are they probably able to do a lot more, they're doing more testing, they're becoming more efficient, they're getting more experience across multiple jobs because they can do it faster. They'll be able to grow a little bit faster in the industry. Because the end game of consulting is, can you do multiple projects quickly, effectively, and within a budget? And if you can do all those things based on learning originally, you'll be fine. And that's kind of why we do those guidances, because it's kind of hard to teach someone to test fast, but you can teach them how to audit appropriately over certain controls that you're going to see across multiple companies. And then you can kind of force them into a better position.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there, that you kind of start with quality and then speed comes over time as they just iterate and, keep doing a thing. I think it is really important to have that foundation when somebody starts doing something. Okay, this is the way we do it correctly the first time. Get that ingrained in somebody's head, and then the speed comes afterwards. I think oftentimes the mistake is made that we're just going to have people go fast, and that's the primary priority. So that's what we start with, and then ultimately, quality takes a back seat. I'm reminded of when I first started learning recruiting. I was thinking, man, it always seemed like it was such go, go, go and speed, speed, speed. But now that I think about it, we did have a template. We had to, we had a template for everything. We had to memorize the process. We had to memorize the script that we followed on the phone and stuff like that. And then once we had that down, it was quick. I mean, it was within a couple of weeks, but once we had that down, we would start working on making certain number of calls every day. So yeah, that's a great approach. What would you say differentiates the people that are um, accelerating exponentially, improving, versus the folks that don't do it quite as quickly? What would you say is different between those two groups of people?
Typically, what I've found is it's a drive factor. So, there's an average line, there's, the below average. We don't really need to talk about that, but the average and above. And the difference between those is someone that wants to get promoted. They have the drive to grow their career. Typically, just from a basic standpoint, tends to exceed and go faster because they're so driven to get to their goals that they know that if the faster they learn it, the faster they start doing this, they're going to be researching late at night, right? Learning systems, learning the right questions, learning that testing. And maybe they're taking more time out of their day and looking at harder clients and learning how to test. They're teaching themselves because they want it. And the difference there is exponentially. The trajectory for their growth is going to be like this, where an average person is probably going to be like a little bit of a hill, right? Like one's going to be a straight slope up, and then one's going to be like that steady hill. And you need the two routes, right? Because the people that shoot to the top straight to the slope, kind of similar to what you're saying, my career went really fast, right? Um, I made senior manager in 7 years, which is a little bit early in my career, but it wasn't because I'm less knowledgeable than others. It's that I knew that I wanted something and I started researching, and I spent hours after work learning about systems, learning about audit, learning the SOC 2 frameworks, learning what NIST was. And that allowed me to stand out to clients because I knew how to help them and answer their questions and guide them in the appropriate way. And that's something that you can't give someone. I can train someone to test, but I can't give them the drive to want to succeed. And the drive factor is really what stands out to me.
Yeah, it's actually the same way in recruiting or sales, or, because I've done both of those now. Really, any results oriented field. I think especially people oriented fields, there isn't necessarily like, okay, I'm going to put in this tangible amount of work and then I'm going to get X output. But the more you do, the better and more efficient you get, and the better you are at even interacting with people and affecting better outcomes. Is there a role for, say, organization in all of this? Complexity about becoming somebody who's good at what you do. Would you say that plays a role?
I honestly, I don't think it does as much, um, because the reason I say that is that no matter organization size or not, I think if you have that drive factor, you'll stand out no matter if you're at a small company or a large company. Because I've been at a big four firm, and I've been at a regional firm, and I've been at a cyber standout $1 million firm that just churns this out. And the way to get promoted is to stand out. And the only way you stand out is if you're that person that's up on the top of the mountain, right? I'm doing 3 times more. I'm performing for my next level before I get there. So you know that I'm ready. And I think that doesn't matter what size of firm, whatever you do with your work. I think even, regular industry, right? If you stand out, if you're pushing above and beyond, that is noticed. And it might take a second, but if you keep up and you show up every day and perform at that level, eventually, no matter small, big, you will get noticed.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I think there's always a performance element, regardless of what size firm that you're at. I was actually going to ask you about organization as far as keeping things straight. Organization, like for me, I had a really good mentor when I first started out recruiting, and she taught me how to organize my file structure. in such a way because we didn't have a very advanced applicant tracking system. So a lot of this was manual and people were still working off of spreadsheets and stuff like that. But she showed me how to set up a file structure for each client, each job, have everything in the right place. And I still use a similar file structure to this day for everything in my business, running a business. And it's been a force multiplier for me. I get things done so much quicker than my peers. I don't have to work long hours to get stuff done. So, like, has that been a factor for you as well?
Yeah, I kind of actually, when I started with Align, they taught me how to be organized to completion. They have a lot of things that guide you, right? At this point, you reach out for the audit. I reach out to the client to tell them I'm posting my request list. It kind of teaches you how to be organized and how to structure an audit from start to begin, like end, when you don't really know what's going on, right? As a senior, you're just like, I know I'm supposed to test controls, but maybe I'm missing the when do I reach out to the client? Um, how do I know when to guide the client in the right direction? Or how do I tell the client we're behind without really rocking the boat? And it kind of shaped me into how to be organized. And then as I kind of moved away from that and took my career elsewhere, I learned that having a good organization structure, like I still use a calendar invite when I am going to send out a request list and email a client. And I learned that when I was a senior auditor. And that's something that you can't, you have to learn how to do. And a lot of times I started a whole new organization like tool at my firm now, and all the auditors love it, right? It gives them a structure of like, when do I reach out to a client? What do I put in a document system, right? Like a repository. And it kind of shapes them into doing stuff over and over. And now they don't have to look. Within the first month, I don't ask them anymore. They know to do it. And it's just based on organization and teaching them that. But that also helps with when you're doing budgeting and realization on the backside at upper management level, right? Because at the end of all of this, someone's on the backside looking at how many hours were spent on this project. Why did it go over budget? Okay, what did we do well to go under budget here? Like, how do we apply that across the board? And that's where that organization piece comes into play in public accounting.
For sure, yeah, and I'll often hear how billable hours are such a huge factor in consulting and public accounting, and some people really hate the utilization aspect of the job and stuff like that. Um, do you have any best practices for kind of balancing work life and family life, work life balance, and making sure that the people underneath you aren't overworked? Because oftentimes I'll hear about burnout in the public accounting world.
Yeah, as a manager, it's really big for me. I actually have whoever's on my projects, say I have 10 projects going at once, I will make sure I kind of like keep an eye on the projects that they're on. Actually, kind of, even if it's not mine, I kind of keep an eye on, okay, I know this person is doing 5 audits at this time. Maybe they're going to be struggling a little bit more. So what I'll do is I actually have trackers that show where we're at testing wise, where like when we take evidence. And sometimes I'll jump in and help them. Like I'll do testing still. I'll roll up my sleeves and just do it. Especially if they're overworked, because that I don't really want any of my staff working more than 40 hours if I can have that be a thing. If it's actually reasonable and we can do that, the max that I have done since a manager is have them do 45. I really try and steer away from it. Um, it is not good for people. It promotes a very bad environment if you're forcing a lot of overtime and, they have families, they have lives, they maybe want to travel, or maybe their passion is sailing. They like to sail and they can't sail if they're working till 8 o'clock at night. And then they're going to be miserable at work. Like they can't, there's no reset for them. And it's so important that I watch what they're doing to make sure I can help them. And say I know staff A is his name's John. John is working 50 hours, but Dan is working 30. Maybe I'll take one job from John and put it, and they both get 40. So I try and watch what they're doing, like maybe a week of 50 hours, not a big deal, right? That's something that sometimes happens, unfortunately. but I don't want it to be consecutive. And I definitely don't want to burn people out. So I'm the type of manager who's like, please come to me. Like, if you need help, I'll do testing. I'll lead a walkthrough for you, whatever you guys need to be successful. And I mean, it's typically why our teams stay with me, because I don't do that. Where I've been in situations where they're like 60, 70 hours and you're just dying because you can't get that outlet. You can't do what you love to do, because life is not all about work. And that's something that we have to teach the staff and seniors underneath us, even the managers. I don't want you to be miserable. You should come to work. You should leave and be able to leave work at work. And that's so hard in consulting.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, especially if it's, holiday season and you're trying to take some time off and the clients are trying to cram in their audits at the last minute, before the end of the year. I know that's sometimes an issue. But yeah, one of the things I've noticed about some of the best hiring managers I've worked with over the years is they do take that very hands-on approach to management. They do care about people, and they do try to keep people from burning out. And I think there's some tangible benefits to that too. I would imagine productivity is increased if people aren't burnt out, make less errors. They're more likely to stick around. One part of the talent gap not talked about as much is retention. There's just kind of a sense, especially in some firms, I think, where they just know that they're going to have sky high attrition. It's just part of what they expect. But that's a lot of money and time spent finding people again to backfill those roles of people that you lost. Any best tips for best practices for retention?
Yeah, I try and kind of manage the load, just like I was telling you. But a big thing is, I actually have done this process with clients when they're like, I have to have a year-end report, and I know we're kind of already booked, right? I will try and give them incentives to move their audit, or I'll say, hey, we're super busy. If you can get me all this evidence, we'll do what we need to get everything within the audit period. But we're going to start field work in January, do our testing. I'll give you a little bit of a discount, or knock their fee down significantly. If they choose to move their year-end date, I will give them a big discount to come with me, because then I'm not killing my staff or my seniors or my managers. And then if it's someone that has to have it, I'll do it myself, or find someone even on our audit side or our tax side that's kind of slow. And we'll do that. We share resources quite frequently, and it works. You can, it may not be as fast. They may not test as fast, but you now helped out the other half of your team. But my main thing is trying to sell them away from it. And then if I can't, then I go down the other path, which is find some extra resources. Sometimes we'll even go down the route, which I try not to, is do like a consultant factor where I call someone from out, bring them in. I really just try not to overwhelm my staff and my seniors and my managers, because it's not fair to them.
Yeah, that's a great way to go about it for sure. And yeah, I think a lot of firms will bring in contractors for that reason when there's overflow, and versus hiring somebody full time permanent. That's a lot of overhead if your client work fluctuates quite a bit. But yeah, it's good to see that you're thinking about that sort of thing. When you do hiring or interviewing folks, there's a lot of debate in the security community, I think, about certs versus experience versus education. Do you weight any of those more heavily or more importantly than others?
I don't. I typically treat that all the same, right? Um, the reason I do that is because with consulting, I think it's more of a personality and adaptivity fit than it is about if you have 10 certs or if you have, you know, 10 years of experience. What I like to see is someone that is willing to change and adapt, because those folks will go further in consulting, because consulting is so ever changing, right? It's probably like recruiting, right? It's always changing. It, I may do things the same way for 5 years, and then the next year it's flipped on its head, right? And so I think that's more what I weigh on is that personality trait, those personality traits than I do of like certs, because anyone that is very intelligent can go get a cert, right? I have, as you can see, a bunch of degrees and certs behind me, but that doesn't actually affect how good I perform at my job. And neither does my experience level, right? Like I can speak from that as like, I've only been doing this 7 years. I can look at other senior managers that have been doing this for 15 to 20, but I can outperform them because of my adaptability and my like dedication to learn and grow and change with the environment where, and so that's why I don't weigh heavily on any of that. I look at just the personality type.
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring up the fact that you'll outperform people with a lot more experience. I felt the same way. I always have. I was a year and a half into recruiting, and I was outperforming people that were doing it 10 plus years. What's always kind of bugged me in hiring seems like, especially in security for whatever reason versus IT, there's almost an obsession with just years of experience. How many years of experience has this person done this thing? And I've always said that doesn't really tell you anything. If they've done something for 10 years, you don't know how good they are at that thing or their attention to detail or how quickly they work. Or, when I was at the consulting firm that I was at, I accomplished more in 2.5 years than most people do in 20. There was just such a pace and such a need to get things done. And I was the only guy doing all this stuff. And I think oftentimes that's pretty easy to suss out in an interview. There's been situations where as an external recruiter, I'll send candidates over to our clients and be like, look, I know this person only has a year and a half of experience, but this is somebody who's going to be partner tracked. They're really, really promising. They're really bright. They've done a lot in a year and a half. I know you're looking for a senior, but please just give this person a shot. They're going to outperform some of your seniors, and often they just won't get a shot, even though they're going to be extremely productive. So yeah, I guess that's my little soapbox rant for the episode. Have you encountered that at all, where there's a focus on years of experience?
Yeah, and it's something that you fight with, because kind of as you've seen consulting evolve, you've seen this, like especially now you're starting to see a little bit of a different level of partner that might not have been the same 10 years ago. And so you're trying to say, hey, like if people have gotten there faster, they're more likely to hear you out, right? Where maybe a partner that's been there for 20 years might not necessarily feel that way because it was ingrained in them that they must do this for this many years, this for this many years, to do this for another year. Like they'll do, you got to be a staff for 3 years, a senior for 3 years, a manager for 3 years, a senior manager for 10, and then you can make partner. And so it's a mind shifting kind of factor that you're kind of facing right now, right? Because if you were to put someone in front of me like that, I would be willing to go for it. Where maybe someone else might not, because if it's so ingrained in us, it's hard to break that track. Because if you think about it, when you're talking to someone like that, they probably went through that. You have to do this for 3 years, and then they think, well, they can't be nearly ready. They haven't done it for 3 years because that's what we've learned to do. It's a learned behavior, right? And learned behavior is something that is hard to beat even when you're in the real world, because you start doing it so much, you think that you have to do it that way. And so that's where the mind shift is starting to change now, that we don't care how long you've done it if you have the experience and the knowledge to do it. And that's what you're going to start seeing as there's a shift in the hiring, because a lot of people that are in hiring positions like will have that flexibility because they may be more like on the same track that I did, right? We got there really quickly, so we're more apt to adapt to look at someone like that, where maybe you wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago, which you wouldn't have. They would have still followed that same path. I mean, when I got into financial accounting, they told me you have to be a staff for 4 years. You have to be a senior for 3 years to grow. So it's just one of those things where it's just beating that behavior.
Yeah, that's interesting. You could almost kind of see it as a bias. Or, and obviously that is changing, like you mentioned. What would you attribute that change to? What do you think is causing the industry to evolve that way?
I think it's just more people doing going a different route, right? If you have enough people that are like, I have a lot of friends like me that have beaten the mold. And when you start seeing a lot of people beating the mold, then it's more common, right? Then you're like, okay, are they really ready? Oh yeah, they're definitely ready. Let's get them a promotion early. Who cares? They know how to do it. We have an availability. Let's not hire outside. Let's hire them. We know they're good. They give us a good product. And I think that's something that you're going to start seeing as more people come up quicker than the typical standard path, right? Because what you were facing 5 years ago were people that had to go through a set path to get there. They wanted you to do the same thing. It was like I feel like you're ready. That's how I know when you're ready, because that's how I learned that you should be ready. And now it's starting to switch.
Yeah, I could almost kind of see one of the reasons for it being that there's a bunch of smaller firms that kind of popped up out of nowhere to serve the market, and they weren't, because I worked at one, they weren't holding people to that same schedule of, you have to be a staff for 3 years, then senior. And so once they broke the mold, the competitive pressures, basically, if you're competing for staff, they want to get promoted faster, the really top performers. And if you're the only company not promoting people quickly and everybody else is, you're going to have to either adapt or die. That's the key of it. I think same way of, kind of like you mentioned, being an employee, you really have to be able to be adaptable and learn quickly and stuff like that. And companies need to do the same, I think, to be competitive. And yeah, as the industry matures, I'm sure we'll see more and more of that. Any thoughts on the newest, I would say, development in the compliance and consulting space, the automation platforms? Have you seen those making an impact on the firms auditing out there right now?
Yeah. I mean, we see them every day, right? There's tons of GRC tools, right? They make audits for clients a lot easier because there's a platform that has everything that we're going to come ask you, right? I'm still going to have to ask you some questions. Unfortunately, that's just the way an audit goes. But I can now go to a tool and find everything I need. I don't have to ask you to upload this evidence, which, it doesn't sound like it takes a long time. But if there's 100 pieces of evidence and it takes them 10 minutes to upload, they have to go find it and then upload it. About, let's just say it takes them 10 minutes. That's a lot of time for a client. And so now with those like specialty tools, even like some of the AI integration tools that will like remind them and that, they help, right? Because they've already got it in one space for us. And a lot of those GRC tools allow auditors to get access and go grab. So, there's integrations to like even AWS. So I can go take the monitoring screenshots without asking the client to show me. So now instead of saying, hey, I need to talk to someone that can show me the IT monitoring platform, I can go look myself with those integrations. And that cuts my time in half because I'm not wasting time tracking down who I may need to talk to, finding a good time for them. I can just go do it myself. And that allows a lot more efficiency for us, right? I still have to do the testing, which is going to take a while, right? You still got to do quality work, but like it does help with obtaining evidence and it makes the client's life easier. So it makes everyone's life a little bit more easy. It still doesn't change that I have to test it and it's still going to take me, I don't know, 2 hours per control, whatever it is, it's still going to happen, right? It doesn't necessarily mean I can test quicker, but it does mean I can do a lot of stuff myself, which does cut down a lot of time. And it also saves the client time. So that's why we like those tools, right? Um, from a standpoint of why we want to partner with tools or why we encourage clients to get them. If I say, if you think it fits your need, there's no reason not to do it. And sometimes they'll be like, well, I think if we got this tool, we can maybe eliminate positions, which is what we've started seeing. a lot of over the last year. His clients worried about positions and having to cut back on resources, not having that ability to have someone specifically there to do SOC audit, because sometimes they'll have a specific person that just does SOC or PCI or whatever it is. And right now, the market is very hard on a lot of our clients, and they're thinking, oh, if I use this tool, maybe I don't necessarily need 5 people to do this job. I can maybe hire one that manages all of it, and that will save us money overall. It's a hard truth, and it's really sad to see that, because sometimes you've been talking to this person, that's the person you've dealt with for the last 10 years, and they've now been let go and they're replacing them with a tool. It's hard for everyone involved, but sometimes it's just a business decision. And unfortunately, that's what we're starting to see and have questions of like, what does that change for the audit for us? And what I tell people is, I can go grab stuff that I couldn't before. And as far as your walkthroughs, it will cut down time. It will still lose some time. But if it was a 100-hour audit, maybe it's now a 60 or 50-hour audit. So it usually cuts it down in half, but it's still quite a lot of work for the audit team.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I kind of think about it like the automation platforms popped up out of kind of an evolutionary pressure because there weren't enough seniors out there and there was all this work to be done. Something had to happen, something had to give, so boom, then the automation platforms pop up. Maybe now they're going a little bit too far and taking jobs away from people. And that's a whole nother, tangent we could go on about AI, but we're coming up on time here. So, and certainly appreciate you being on again, Nicole. Just one last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be?
I think right now the major thing is that, there's been a lot of turnover in the industry, whether it's audit, whether it's clients. I've seen a lot of my really good clients, long-term clients, have to have layoffs, and that's something that you don't want to talk about, right? It's terrible. These are people that are losing jobs, cutting half their teams, and it's really hard on our client, and it also puts everyone else at risk too, because when you're cutting costs, you need to cut costs, and then they're cutting costs in other areas, which is making other businesses suffer as well, right? Because like I've had friends from certain firms that have been laid off. They cut 90% of their teams. And that's a big deal. And that's something that we're not talking about, because it was a couple years ago, the business was growing and everyone was growing. And now we're seeing some drop off due to some of the market pressures right now.
Yeah, it's a lot slower on the hiring front than I think I've probably ever seen since I've been in the recruiting space. So it's a crazy time for sure. And yeah, there's a lot of layoffs happening. I always think, with all these layoffs happening, where do these people go? If there's only so many open jobs right now, something's got to change, and if AI continues to evolve and eliminates jobs in the long term, we got to figure something out. So totally agree. That works. Well, appreciate your time, Nicole. Thanks for being on, and thanks for everybody.
All right, bye.